Good evening and welcome to Thursdays with NAMI. My name is Peg Morrison. I'll be your host for the evening. I am the Director of Programs with NAMI North Carolina. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness North Carolina. I'm glad you're here. Thursdays with NAMI is our way of building conversations and building community around the topic of mental health. June is Pride Month. For many of us, it's a time to fly our rainbow flags and celebrate all that is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. You may know that Pride Month came about after something called the Stonewall Uprising in New York City, when it was common for members of law enforcement to barge into queer spaces, harass people, and make arrests. That began to change in June of 1969 when the crowd actually fought back. The protests that followed spread all over the city and a movement was born. Since then, so much has changed. Personally, I was just amazed 6 years ago when the US Supreme Court struck down state laws that were banning same-sex marriage. Clearly, things are very different now, but we still have our work cut out for us. Reports of hate crimes are on the rise, and just being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer makes me more likely to attempt suicide. It makes me more likely to live with a mental health condition. So there are struggles, the discrimination, the stigma that creates an oppression that is a mental health challenge in and of itself. So how are things going specifically in North Carolina with our community, and how can we create more welcoming spaces? Our guests tonight have a lot of wisdom and expertise they're going to share with us. I'm so glad to have Kori Hennessey of the LGBT Center of Raleigh, Rebby Kern of Equality North Carolina, and Alex Vitagliano of the Frank Harr Foundation. Welcome guests. We're going to circle back with them in just a few minutes. As usual, the first part of our show will be that interview. Partway through, we'll show our video of the week, and then we'll spend time answering questions from you, members of our virtual studio audience. Now we're going to take time out to thank this group. Thursdays with NAMI is funded in part by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services through the Federal Community Mental Health Block Grant Fund. We are very grateful always for their guidance and their supports. And now, without further ado, let me introduce our guests. I'm so excited again to have them. Kori Hennessey, pronouns they, them, is Director of Education and Programs at the LGBT Center of Raleigh. As a transmasculine, non-binary queer person, Kori is dedicated to sharing their personal experience and educating the community with the goal of creating more affirming and equitable spaces. Rebby Kern, pronouns they, them, is a biracial, non-binary queer person whose personal experience and career has placed them in the work of opening hearts and minds to equity, inclusion, and action. Rebby serves as the Director of Education Policy at Equality North Carolina. Finally, Alex Vitagliano is a trans man and graduate of UNC Wilmington. Starting in the social work field, he developed a passion for serving his community. He believes that we can build a better tomorrow for the up and coming generation through communication and connection. All right, welcome all of you. So I'm going to start with a general question that usually kicks off our interview. We're always interested to know the background of our guests here on Thursdays with NAMI. And you can go in whichever order you like. If you're not sure, you can go alphabetical, which by last name, which is Kori, Rebby, Alex. Your call, and tell us your story in a nutshell.
I guess that's on me. Darn for me having a early last name.
No pressure.
Right. Yeah. So that's my story in a nutshell. That's a hard one. From a fairly young age, I kind of knew that, my sexuality was just slightly different than most of the people around me. I came out at actually a very young age, as far as that goes, not even really knowing all the things that that meant. And for such a long time, I know that I kind of attributed my masculine sense, right, to my sexuality, but I, didn't really think about it beyond that. I didn't really have, any exposure to the trans community. I didn't really understand, like what was happening in my life. But so it took me a really long time to kind of figure all that out. And I actually started working at the LGBT Center right around the time when I was really exploring some of that. And so being in that queer space really helped me a lot. And, being around community members and people that are part of the LGBTQ community definitely put me in that mindset of, I have people and I have places I can go, and I have, I have a support system, and I can figure this out and I can get through it. So that's kind of my story. It's been a very short nutshell, but getting involved in the community, networking, in the community that I have lived experiences in is something I think I cherish every day.
All right. Well, that's wonderful to hear, and we'll finish the questioning later.
I'll jump in after. It's really great to be here. Like Peg said, I'm Rebby. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I really get a sense that I had a deep calling as a kid. And one memory that I share is being in third grade, and I began to capture all of the contact information for my peers, and I would write their names and their phone numbers down and on little pieces of paper, glue them together, and create my own little address book. I would just call my friends and my peers in class and leave voicemails on their landlines. Some people in the room tonight may not know what that is. And what I really learned from that is I began to find leadership positions in middle school and high school and even through college, is understanding that I had a deep calling to serve my community and to hear them. And so as I began to explore my own gender identity and sexual orientation, it became quite clear that my calling was even greater than anything I could have imagined. And so I had an opportunity in college to really speak up and speak out, and ended up starting my first queer nonprofit before I turned 21. And it's been magical since. So my first job full-time out of school was a programs manager for a national queer policy org. And thus a policy nerd was born. And so I'm grateful to see 10 years of experience on my resume now within policy for queer youth. And I'm grateful for that. And so as I navigate through my personal balance is to know when to rest, and to know that my self-care does not look like the news or Instagram, really, or even TikTok these days. And so learning how to turn that off and to just soak in what I need to recharge so I can continue on. Grateful to be here.
Got it. Well, that's neat. It's a wonderful thing to have clarity at such a young age and to be able to follow that. And Alex.
Hey y'all, my name is Alex. I am from North Carolina, went to middle, high school, and college here. I started probably exploring my sexuality and gender identity a little bit later on, probably around the time that I was graduating high school and college. And it was definitely a slow transition for me. Being in the South made it a little bit more difficult than some other areas that may have access to more resources. But we all have our own journey and make our way through the way we do. As I graduated college and started getting into my career, which was in the social work field, I definitely started to recognize not only how healing it was for myself, but others as well, to really take ownership of my story and have some pride behind it. And through exploring that and being more open with myself, I really fell into some phenomenal companies after I moved out to Arizona, and really got an opportunity to specialize and work with our community, whether it was behavior coaching or building educational and support programs. And through that, it not only was was fantastic for my career, and working with those families and children was amazing, but also give myself a lot of confidence to further and continue my transition as well.
Hmm. Well, it sounds like y'all are doing so much good work out there, and I'm just glad to know that you're a presence out there, because there are so many people who need support and who need a culturally competent person that they can turn to. What are y'all doing for Pride Month, either yourself or just what you see in the community?
A lot. I was just talking about this before we started. Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. The center is involved in a lot of things. I know that a lot of people are pretty upset that Out Raleigh Pride has been canceled again this year. And you know, the thing that most folks don't understand is that it takes months and months and months to plan a festival of that size. And, you know, North Carolina is just starting to kind of, you know, get back to the swing of things. So, you know, we had to make that hard decision. But we're putting in a car parade though at the end of this month. And people seem to be a little confused about what that means, but essentially, I mean, it's a parade. We are, you know, people get to sign up their cars and, you know, get to decorate and bring things to, you know, basically celebrate the day. And we're also going to have a activation space that will have community partners there, handing out resources and talking about their programs and their connection with the community, as well as kind of having more of like activities and something that people can kind of be engaged in with. So it's almost similar to like a mini Out Raleigh Pride type festival, but there is a parade component, which we've not really had much of in the past. So it's pretty exciting. But beyond that, I know that I'm doing a lot of talks and workshops and presentations and trainings, and we're doing tabling events at different things. But yeah, it's a lot going on. So for me, it's going to be a lot of work and not necessarily a whole lot of personal, but I enjoy it. So.
Right. Very good. I know the center is always out there providing support and fun opportunities. I had someone ask me too, why didn't we have a NAMI walk? Because it was just last month, and it does take a very long time to put together that kind of event. I definitely get that. Rebby.
Yeah, so Equality North Carolina is really here as a statewide organization to support and help like the work that folks are doing at centers and on the ground. And so any way that y'all need support, we're happy to come. And as we have vaccinated folks and volunteers and staff, we're happy to help those in person as well as virtual events. And personally, we were talking about this right before the call began. My personal intention this month is to really focus on how I can help build and sustain trans economies, helping ensure that dollars in the pockets of trans and gender nonconforming folks stay as long as possible in the pockets of trans and gender nonconforming folks. And what that looks like is that instead of purchasing a piece of clothing from a corporate company who might be giving a portion of proceeds back to LGBTQ organizations, I might Venmo a trans person to support the work that they're doing and try to keep that money directly in. So that's something that I'm personally doing this month, and I welcome folks to participate in that way as well.
Yeah, that's a wonderful focus. And just about everyone I know needs that kind of support and direction and discipline. So thank you for doing that. And Alex.
Yeah, kind of like Kori touched on, the pandemic has created a very unique Pride Month for us. I know we're used to a lot of big, bright, outgoing parties where a lot of people get together. Unfortunately, we don't have the same kind of availability to do that, but it's really provided a unique experience of almost like mini gatherings. So I know for Wilmington specifically and the Frank Harr Foundation, there's a lot of smaller meetings, whether it's our Walk for Pride events, whether it's our transgender and genderqueer support groups. There's also a lot of festivals that are going to be hosted around town that we'll be participating in. But as myself personally, I really appreciate Pride Month just because it tends to open up a lot of willingness for education and connection, which I think is a fantastic opportunity that we're given throughout this month.
Mhm. Absolutely. And that circles back to your mission of using connection and communication to bring people together and build things. So that works out nicely. And next up, another question for all of you. So each of you works with the LGBTQ community every day. And I think if anyone has a pulse on that, you all do. Are there any people or anecdotes that come to mind, any stories that illustrate what you see happening, an important trend or the spirit of the community today?
I'd be happy to go. Yeah, a very unique experience, and definitely was a new one for me. I was running one of our recent genderqueer support programs, and I usually go into these programs really armed and ready to discuss some pretty heavy dysmorphia and heavy topics. And we had a couple new individuals that came in that were just wildly confident and very much owning their story. And it was definitely a really amazing thing to see the up and coming generation coming in with that strength and individual self-power, and really brought me back and made myself reflect on maybe this doesn't need to be as therapeutic and supportive all the time. It may just necessarily be a space to gather and connect with like-minded individuals.
Well, that is extraordinarily refreshing to hear. Personally, I co-facilitate a support group as well, and I've been getting more the really difficult things. We met this Tuesday evening, and there was homelessness and domestic violence and just a lot of heavy stuff. So I'm glad maybe there's some cosmic balance going on. That's uplifting to hear.
There's a lot to be said, certainly. And one thing that really comes to mind in the activation during the anti-trans bills that showed up in the state, there was a beautiful moment during a storytelling event to help folks prepare to speak and testify against legislation that's causing harm to my community. And what that gave us access to is there was a family member of a trans kiddo who we lost many years ago. And from that family member being in the room, there was a person who was connected to the child in the past, and to watch their conversation take place in the moment and to see that healing, and for that parent to really move forward and say, I'm doing this for my kid, just direct me how. And it gave me similar vibes of any time that I've seen Tyler Clementi's family come forward or Matthew Shepard's family come forward and continue that work beyond. And it gives me so much hope that what we can do in this moment is to help ensure that those stories continue on, and that we can do that before it comes to fight legislation. We can do that before it hits obituaries. We get to share and tell our stories in lots of different ways, and to activate that now and to be able to document our history today. I think that is bringing a new spirit that we're telling our story more boldly.
Yeah, well, I love to hear that as well, Rebby. I know that I've read that if you're in a situation where you have to withhold a huge chunk of your identity, it's like that part of you dies. And if we can't bring our whole self into the light and into the conversation, it's just really rough on the mental health. So I love that you're doing that. Kori, do you have something to share with us, or you could pass if you prefer?
I think that, something that I'm thinking about is maybe more on like a smaller scale, and thinking about some of the work that I've done and some of the folks that I've worked with. I do a lot of, I help a lot with people's name and gender marker changes. And in particular, because when I went through it myself, I recognized how daunting and scary that process is. And so since then, I've also I've become a notary. So, I get to offer that service to trans folks. And there's in particular one person that recently I've helped, and through COVID has made it even more complicated. And so, trying to navigate it is even worse. And I think that they had a lot of anxiety around it. And I know that we're only kind of halfway through the process of getting it done, but I'm thinking about, all of the things that, that person can now do. And I know with me, I gained a lot more confidence, and I was able to, I felt like I could do more because I could if I showed my ID, it had the right name on it and things like that. But I don't know. I'm thinking about like stories and working with people and the things that I've done and just the amount of like, the person that I recently worked with, the things that they wrote back to me saying like how much they appreciated the help, and they can't even explain how this is going to change their life. And I don't know, it really moved me in a lot of ways. And I think kind of going along with what Rebby is saying is telling our stories and, being able to make it a little bit more positive and kind of carry those things out instead of it all being negative all the time.
Yeah, well, that makes a whole lot of sense to me. I think a lot of times the LGBTQ community gets a message that we're not worthy or we don't belong. And if your ID doesn't match your authentic self and your name, then it's, it creates more conversations that might push that button. So that makes a lot of sense to me. The next question goes to Kori directly. And Rebby and Alex, if you'd like to follow up, you're welcome to. I know there's a lot of insight here in our panel. So the FBI reports that hate crimes related to sexual and gender identity are on the rise, along with other targets, for example, Asian Americans. In your view, is there anything we can do to offset the impact of this violence on mental health? In other words, how can we promote feelings of safety and mental wellness in our communities?
I think that's something I talk about a lot is access to resources, making things more accessible. In particular, I mean, I think that, having options where folks can kind of just join in when they need to, and having, I'm losing my train of thought. It's been a day. Yeah, I think again, kind of offsetting that, like, okay, I'm feeling this, I'm seeing this, what can I do? I think that, having those support groups, having options, having more accessibility to different things is, I think, absolutely necessary in a lot of ways. Because I think that, as we're seeing things on the news all the time, and as these things are popping up on social media of like, okay, how can we work against, all the negative that's coming to us? And so again, kind of accessibility, creating that sense of community, and what does that look like for each person, and meeting people where they are too, is definitely necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know that you're so good at that. Every time I've called and asked you for a referral or for some piece of information, you've been very quick to respond and always helpful. And I attended a health fair where everyone was pulling you in different directions, and it rained, but you still made everything go smoothly. So I know that's a wonderful thing. Any follow-up, Rebby or Alex?
Kori really hit on it extremely well. And something I find in the way that I can affirm somebody in all of the ways that they're feeling, that's critically important. That that I'm able to show up in my workspace and to say, I'm feeling heavy from what I'm reading in the news, or I need a break from XYZ, and being on a team that can facilitate that without taking away a sick day, without taking away a day of PTO, and whether it looks like a mental health day or not, there's something so critical about what has been adopted in the last year as our workflow has shifted to continue forward. And I really feel like, while it may not offset the occurrence of violence and that we're exposed to more of it online, it will help offset our way of caring for ourselves, and not only of our own identities. Like when I read stuff about my trans community and of my Black community, it's extremely challenging, and then yet it's not new. But knowing when I need to really draw that line and having permission to do so is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to agree 100%. Just through my own experience 10 years ago coming out to now, just the amount of resources and support that are available is immensely different. And I think as we continue to educate and provide that support to individuals, I think we'll hopefully see this violence decrease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our executive director, Gary Kreitz, pointed out recently that as much as the headlines and the drama of the world make it easy to focus on that darkness, there is apparently less violence overall in the world today than at any other time. I also find it helpful to focus on what's going on around me instead of the headlines. Yeah. Okay, so the next question to Rebby: what are the biggest achievements the GLBTQ community should be celebrating this month?
Yeah, there's so many. One thing I have to name first and foremost is that we had a record year in terms of elections in the last general cycle. There are more trans and queer people in local and moving all the way up in positions of legislature that are critically important for us. And to see folks like Andrea Jenkins and as well as Sarah McBride move into these spaces, and especially Sarah McBride moving into a Senate space, I've never in my whole life have seen myself reflected so much in government. And that means so much to me. And then that's a huge, huge win. We may not have won every election of the hundreds of candidates. And I see myself reflected more so, right? And Marie in Georgia, oh my gosh, I'm gonna look it up. Yeah, critical. And I think that they're such a huge, huge player for what we need to see happen, especially in Georgia and beyond. And I celebrate all of the trans athletes, period. Every single person that's ever participated in a team sport ever in their life. I see you, I witness you, you matter, keep going. I have to pause and acknowledge how many trans folks of color have been elevated in the past year, especially May 2020. People have a new drawing, a new calling in to help recenter voices who have often been pushed to the side. That's a celebration, and that has to move beyond 2020. And I also have to name that while some policy in our state proposed or adopted, looking across the nation, we're also seeing on the ground more small wins when it comes to the education space. Maybe it's a smaller policy about names and pronouns. Maybe it's a large statewide update, like our name change, our chosen name field in Power School for our K-12 students in North Carolina. And then moving in, hopefully seeing more come out of the Title IX office as we think more deeply about gender identity and gender-based discrimination in schools. There's a huge win there, and Bostock obviously helped get us there. So there's a lot to acknowledge. There's a lot of growth, and in so many different sectors. And I really sit back in my seat to notice what Gen Z will carry on in their generation as well.
Right, that is an encouraging summary. Thank you. And I agree. It's the numbers of elected officials and sometimes where they are. It's like, woo, didn't see that coming. Yeah. Any follow-up, Kori or Alex? That was a very thorough answer, Rebby. All right, so this one's for you, Alex. Rebby got the what are the biggest achievements? Alex, you get the what are the obstacles that lie ahead of us?
I think in my personal work, one of the biggest obstacles that I've seen is people really struggling with the fluidity of this community. Naturally, we kind of try to fit ourselves into boxes, and individuals try to attach labels to things to give us an understanding. But unfortunately, in this community, we see a lot of fluidity and a lot of celebration in that fluidity. Parents of children that I've worked with, I see sometimes have a tough time. For example, I had a young trans masculine child that very much found confidence and comfort through expression in makeup and what would be deemed potentially feminine clothing. And the family really had a tough time with understanding the difference of identity and self-expression. So I think that's something that we're starting to see kind of explored more in our kids that are coming out. But also Rebby kind of touched on this. I think we're seeing a lot of calling around those kids, specifically in schools and the education system, and the need to support for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a sister, Lisa, who she says she hatched last year. She came to the realization and identified as transgender last year. And we've had a lot of conversations about what is non-binary and gender fluidity, and it is a growing conversation. Also, I hear that in support groups as well. And then I wonder, when did it become so important to have that rigid gender box? Why? I guess in some Native American cultures, it was simply not that way. But boy, pervasively in the world, it appears that it is that way, that rigidity. So
yeah, I think we see a lot of cultures that really have an appreciation of that fluidity. And hopefully as time continues, we'll start to see more of an acceptance as time goes on.
I like that. Any follow-up thoughts, Kori or Rebby? Okay. And so now we're back to Kori. Part of your job is to educate folks about the transgender community. And do you get a benchmark of the average person's starting point as they look at the transgender community? Or do most people who sign up for your trainings, are they already pretty accepting?
Well, a lot of the trainings that I do that are for, companies or other businesses or other organizations tend to make trainings or workshop opportunities voluntary, which then leads to most of the people already kind of being at least on board with the idea of, I need to learn more about this and whatnot. So, I do get a wide variety of people that kind of know a little bit, but maybe not a ton. But I think most people are at that, well, I understand kind of what it means, but I don't really understand the nuances beyond that. And I think most people don't really understand or can't comprehend what non-binary is, which I think most of the time whenever I go and do these talks and trainings, people really appreciate, because I give a little bit of my personal experience. And I think that does help kind of get people to say, okay, well, I can put a face to this thing that I'm learning, and I have somebody telling me the real life experience. So although I think that, the people that really should be going to these trainings aren't going to them because they're not necessarily being told they have to. But there has been a few surprises of people coming in of being like, I'm not really sure about this, and then end up kind of, asking some really good questions and leaving with a better understanding. So.
Mm-hmm. Good. It's also very courageous of you to share your story, and I'm sure it helps people just, make it more approachable. Okay. Well, Alex, jump in anytime you'd like to add something. I don't want to generate a lot of awkward pauses. Next one is to Rebby. According to the Human Rights Campaign, state legislatures are systematically peeling away rights from the LGBTQ community. We've got state laws making it a felony to provide transgender youth with the health insurance they need, the health care, banning transgender girls from participating in sports, and religious refusal bills, which essentially make it legal for businesses to discriminate against queer customers. Of course, the other side of that is they feel they need to honor their religious values in that way. What's going on and what's happening in North Carolina?
Yeah. Whew, there's a lot. How much time do we have? There's a lot going on, Peg. This might be an unpopular opinion. This is Trump's last stand. And in my opinion, there is a lot that came out of the previous administration, and that state legislatures are starting to really get a tighter grip on, which we saw on the last election. There are a lot of surprises. With that being said, I just need folks to know that this battle isn't new. People are waking up to it in a different way, and these attacks have unfortunately been going on. But in my time, I've not seen such a strong attack in the K-12 sector. And that state legislatures really trying to dive deeper and supersede what school districts, school boards, and even high school associations are doing well in terms to support gender identity. I also want to name, I did see one question show up in the chat from Luca, that critical race theory is a part of this conversation as well. So we had anti-transport bills, we had medical, anti-trans medical bills across the nation. And in addition, there were 15 states that saw similar conversations as to what was happening here at the state level around critical race theory and so forth. We saw it through the board conversations. We even have been seeing it at the district level in certain areas of the state as well. And critical
race theory is, it encourages people to look at the disparities and consider, if I have white skin, these are the privileges I was granted, and how does that play out in a larger society?
I think that it's a really beautiful way to approach bias and a basic concept for folks, and to not only take a look at social location that folks might name as privilege, all of the privileges that people have. And so using the critical race theory also helps bring an awareness to that bias. And so the deep resistance to that, unfortunately, is upholding patriarchal white supremacy in a really big way. I'll be the one to say it here in this space. And then so hearing the conversations from the arguments on the critical race theory, surprisingly, are similar to the arguments against trans girls playing in sports. So I have to name that and to say that there's a larger conversation here that's coming from a specific group of folks. Where did we end up in North Carolina? Well, the three bills that we saw, we had an anti-trans bill, we had a religious refusal bill, and we had an anti-trans medical bill. Those failed, essentially. However, we are seeing districts now start to borrow language to try to bar trans folks district by district. And so we need to have a deeper look on this. Critical race theory is showing up on school board agendas in some areas too. And so what I really encourage folks to acknowledge, one, there are 64 school board elections coming up this cycle. So between now and November, it's crucially important for you to find out where you live, where students are going to be going to school, if those school board elections in your area are going to show up on your ballot, or if they're appointed. and how to have the same conversations that we're having with our elected officials, Senate, House, and have these with school board members, because these are the people on the ground that are also making these decisions. And so that's a big call to action. And the second is you can visit ncisready.org and really tune in more deeply into the ways that policy is impacting our state for trans folks, for kiddos, and how you can get involved. Alex might have mentioned it earlier too, of what it looks like to call legislatures. Maybe I was on a call earlier. I might be also, Kori, I'm with you. It's like everything's mashing up. It's just June 3rd, and there are so many more days of the month to go.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm glad I got you all early before you were completely burned out. It's the big month. All right. Well, thank you for that summary and for the reminder about those school board elections. There's so many things to track in our minds, and it's easy to lose track of those. Alex, did you have a comment?
No, just getting ready for my turn. Thank you, though.
All right. Good foresight. Good job. So your bio talks about building a better tomorrow through communication and connection. What does that look like in your work?
Yeah, so I would say that a big turnaround for the work that I was doing with kids and families was when I really started to share my story and give these families and kids an opportunity to discuss that story with me, whether it was how I interacted with my family and friends, whether that was how I found my resources, or whether that was my actual legitimate transition story itself. And through that communication and connection, we can see these walls of individuals kind of start to fall down. I know Kori touched on it a little bit. Seeing an individual that maybe has that title and that identity really humanizes it for people and makes it a little more real. And sometimes they can kind of process through that a bit easier. And then in creating support and education groups for both children and those families, it gives both parties an opportunity to potentially get questions answered, to voice some concerns or share some things about themselves that maybe otherwise they would have been able to do so. But I think through that communication and connection is where we're really going to be able to start those kind of groundwork changes within individuals.
All right. I'm going to call you when I need uplifting comments. I think that's going to be on my to-do list, Alex. All right. I love that. And this is to all of you. What gives you hope? Alex.
I think for me, my hope is to work myself out of a job. I would love to be able to see that there's not necessarily a need for this anymore, that there's no need for a specialist or to help children process through this, that it becomes so normalized and accepted and understood that these children are just able to freely do this without it being sort of labeled as something that's odd or concerning or needs additional help, and not just as a part of their journey and them exploring who they are as a person.
Yeah, well said.
Up and next, there is a lot of hope, and I as well hope that there is no longer a T-door, that we don't need a day to honor those that have fallen into the hands of violence and transphobia. I think a hope is that I recognize the amount of shift that's happening for folks. I'm seeing more cisgender people acknowledge that they're cisgender, and folding themselves into a solidarity level conversation about dismantling systems of harm for trans folks and especially trans kiddos. That level of awareness, whether it's showing up as folks having their pronouns in their Zoom name, which is like the least you can do, right? But even moving up into offering the redistribution of resources, and that element is so important right now for folks to literally survive. I'm based in Charlotte, North Carolina, on the land of Catawba Nation, and unfortunately, we're leading the way in trans violence in our nation, and that's a challenge. So my hope, right? My hope is that there are more resources, there are more organizers like Alex and Kori, and more spaces like this, that Peg that you're hosting, to deepen this conversation. So there's a big call to action ongoing, not only during Pride, not only on TDEV and TDOR, but every single day. And that gives me a lot of hope that I also, like you, Alex, can work myself out of a job.
All right. Kori.
Yeah, I echo that 100%. I think that's something that gives me hope. And I don't know, I really would be able, or would really love to, be able to work with, other communities, kind of creating that, like, the stronger bond between intersectionalities, and talking about, how many different intersections of identities that happen, and really, I mean, coming together to fight the good fight, I guess, to create a better local place, to create a better world for the younger generations that are coming. And I think that we're seeing that a little bit now, but I think that there could be a lot more to be done, to come together again and to kind of, acknowledge the struggles, but also work towards what would be better, and what would, be good for everybody.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I like that. Taking those positive steps and also remembering the intersections of, there's racism, sexism, different phobias. How can we uplift people and sort of honor what they're experiencing on these different fronts? So thank you for those comments, all of you. And we are going to have more time with each other. Right now, we're going to take a break and move to our video of the week. And I'm happy to say we've got Policy Director Ashish George, who will be talking about Advocacy Day, NAMI North Carolina's online event, to show us what we're going to focus on and how we can change the world. We've been talking a lot about the need for advocacy, so the timing is very good. First, I want to give a shout out to all the people who are working behind the scenes to help us out. We've got Gail Pruitt, our psychiatric nurse, who's always there helping out in the chat box and on Facebook Live. Gary Kreitz, who's helping out in the chat box and who's always there for us to be a support. We've got a new volunteer with us tonight, Melanie, and thank you for being here behind the scenes, observing and planning to help out in the future. And of course, thanks most of all to our fantastic guests for being here and sharing your wisdom and expertise with us. I know you have a lot going on, and this is one more evening, so I'm hoping that this will work. Can y'all see this video? I'm not hearing you, so I'm assuming you can.
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. Let me see. Once in a while, screen share just gives me a hard time with Zoom, as much as I love Zoom, and it's been my friend during COVID-19 pandemic. Let me see if I can try this again. Talk amongst yourselves. All right, here we go. I have a good feeling this time. Why will my video not appear? All right, we are going to put a hold on that for until next week. But right now, I will simply give a huge shout out for Advocacy Day, which is June 11th. It's a Friday. Join us. You'll hear Gary Kreitz speak. You'll hear some of your elected officials speak, and all kinds of wonderful, exhilarating comments will be online for just an hour and a half. You don't want to miss that exciting event. Now it's time to take your questions, members of the virtual studio audience. If you can type them in the Q&A, that makes them much easier for us to address. If you type them in the chat, they kind of scroll away. And I see we've got some questions queued up right here. And so I'll start with this one. Thank you for all the work you are doing and for being here this evening. I find that my queer teens' mental health needs are often conflated with their queer identity and lived experience, particularly in the public school setting, i.e. their depression and learning issues must be caused by their non-binary identity and gay orientation. I would love to hear the panel's thoughts on this and would also appreciate ideas for resources around adolescence, mental health, and queer identity. So we're looking at a mother who sees her teen struggling with school, and it seems that the teen feels that it's all about their depression. The depression, their learning issues are all about being non-binary and having a gay orientation.
Hey, thank you for sharing. I know it can be really tough to talk about things like this, and it can be really difficult, especially when providers are trying to hyper-focus on those negative things, because really this should be a moment of celebration. There, as far as resources, I'm not terribly sure what area you're in, but I know that even in the smaller towns in the South, usually there is some access to a youth pride group. PFLAG is also a fantastic resource that I refer families to a lot. They have a variety of options to learn from, whether that's TED Talks or books or movies, documentaries. There's a lot of different resources if those resources aren't necessarily accessible to you close to your town or where you live.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also like to add too that as awful as COVID was, it has definitely opened up a lot of opportunities and has opened up our eyes of being able to offer things that are virtual more so than ever before, just because we're able to reach, the people that might not, like Alex said, would have resources or programs in their town. So I think that there's a lot of options as long as you're kind of open to exploring more of like a virtual space.
And one thing that I'll add is the acknowledgement that the depression likely is not coming from the identity. Instead, it's caused by the rejection because of that identity in spaces. And so the resources that Kori and Alex have shared are crucial to help folks really be seen. And even if that is a Discord chat, text-based or sometimes even voice-based, that can go a really long way when spending 8 hours in a Zoom room with unsupportive peers or even educators. And so as a parent, I continue to invite you to have those conversations with your school administrators and even school counselors. Oftentimes, our school counselors aren't even prepared to have these conversations and aren't receiving the professional development that they need to serve our queer children the best in schools. And so professional development across the board for educators, school counselors, administrators, 110% find that accountability within this school system at large too.
Wow, excellent comments. And my sister Lisa would be proud of me. I know what Discord is because of her, and it's a room. I'm sure one of you could explain it better, but if you're a gamer, you already know it's a place where you can work on your voice. Go ahead and Google Discord and trans voice, and you'll see that there's a community. It started out as something for gamers, people who are big into video games, and now it's a trans community where you can get a free voice lesson or get all kinds of support. So definitely check out Discord. Thank you. Question from Luca. The whole critical race theory thing is concerning. I feel like it's going to make it hard for future LGBTQ folks, and they could be separated just by skin color. My question is, how safe will the LGBT community be in the long run? I worry about my young sibling who's not out yet, but I worry about her future.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I'll jump in here because I brought it up a little bit earlier. Here's what's crucial to understand. One is that the critical race theory is not seeking to resegregate people. The critical race theory is an approach to acknowledge the generational trauma and harm caused to people of color by systems and white supremacy at large. The critical race theory does not seek to make any one person wrong or right. It is a lens to help move our communities forward in a way that's more equitable. And we cannot do that without first acknowledging harms caused. And so with that being said, to adopt this theory, to teach to the healing that can come from this theory is similar to how we teach about the approach to capitalism in our community, similar to the way that we think about political parties. It's needed to understand how all of these elements of systems work to help inform and make the best decisions person by person. And so thinking through the intersectional approach, if we were to move forward broadly with critical race theory, we have an opportunity to save lives, because the critical race theory also helps Black trans women and trans Latin women and folks who are intersectionally pushed out to the margins. You can also refer to minority stress and what that means for folks, that we can then have a better approach to help change systems and to help keep folks alive, keep funding in their pockets and in lots of ways. So it can only help. And I worry about Gen Z as well. And if Gen Z is taking down Wall Street, I do believe they're already working through a critical race theory, and we need our systems to catch up.
Thank you for that, Rebby. And just for my own edification, I Googled critical race theory as you were speaking, and it talks about a group of scholars coming together, focusing on civil rights. And I like this point. It argues that social problems are influenced and created more by social structures and cultural assumptions rather than individual and psychological factors. And I think it's really important to point that out. If you're comparing outcomes, you also have to look at what the starting point was for various people and groups in our society. Are we on an even playing field? Are we on level ground? Not so much. That's my perspective. So thank you for that. Next, from Gary Kreitz, Rebby made a really good point in their comment. What kinds of intersectionality are the panelists witnessing between the concerns of the LGBTQ community and those of color?
And so just to expand a little bit more and bringing this into the conversation, I can go in 100 different directions here, and just acknowledging as the person of color on the panel, just sinking into that. The intersections that we're seeing goes back to the concept of intersectionality actually being a theory to how multiple intersecting identities actually further oppression in many ways. And so with that being said, it's not necessarily always a celebration. It is also an acknowledgement that folks need equity. And Peg, as you were sharing about, your just repeating back on critical race theory, it made me also think of, there's a graphic, right, where equality would be folks peering into a baseball game from outside of the fence and everybody getting the same size box. However, every person is of a different height. And so still the people who could already see over the fence just got a better view, and the other two folks were not. Equity looks like giving everybody a box of different sizing that then puts everybody at an even eye level, seeing over the field. That's what those intersectionalities look like. What I would offer folks is when we dismantle, who's talking about taking the fence down? Why was the fence there in the first place? To keep folks from actually being able to see, and using that as an approach. Thank you, Peg. Yeah, this graphic has been around for a long time. What people aren't talking about is when can we take down the fence? And that's what I'm really seeing for folks of color in the queer community, is that there's been so much attention on gay marriage, There's been so much attention on the Equality Act, but the Equality Act isn't going to heal the anti-trans attacks that are showing up in healthcare, in schools, in housing, in education, in employment. And Title VII has helped us move forward with employment. And then so that's where we really need to take on. I could share 18 examples, right? And I think that graphic might help people who might be new to thinking through that, that there's even more to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see a note in the chat box. Good point about asking about the fence and why is it there? I've seen a video online as well where people are starting a race. It's high school kids and the teacher is making a point and he says, okay, everyone's at the same starting point. Now, if you're white, take 10 steps forward. And if your parents went to college, take 10 steps forward. And if this and if that, take 10 steps forward. And you can see it gives you a very visual representation of how certain factors put you ahead in the race of life. All right. Well, we've got more questions in the box. It's going to keep us busy here, which is a good thing. Is there something like this, but in the state of Florida, a community of support for trans persons? That is an excellent question.
I could talk about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, they, as much as we, like to talk about Florida and it being terrible, all the jokes that come out of Florida, there actually is. I mean, there's a number of organizations, there's a number of LGBTQ specific places. I know that one that pretty much every state has like what's equivalent to Equality NC. So there's Equality Florida. I know St. Petersburg has a center. I know that there's, a number of other, Orlando has a number of different things happening. There's a lot going on. I think that, if you look up just trans resources in Florida, you'll be pretty surprised about the amount of things that are happening. And then also to help find any like specific LGBTQ centers in your area, you can go to Centerlink. That's basically the place where all of the centers are linked up together. There's, you can find information about any center, any space that's a part of that. So yeah. Equality of Florida in the chat. So that will be really helpful for you to look up for information in Florida.
All right. Well, thank you for those excellent suggestions. Any other comments that y'all would like to share? And I found Centerlink as well, which looks like a really wonderful resource for people who are looking for a local space to find support. So thank you for that question, Luca. Right now we are out of questions in the Q&A box, so I'm going to make some of my awesome announcements. Panelists, you can think of any closing statements you might like to make. Again, Advocacy is June 11th. We're going to have a wonderful time on a Zoom platform, as wonderful as you can get, right? If you want to click on the chat box and get registered, we're going to have Advocacy Day, June 11th, information in the chat box soon, I'm sure. And we would absolutely love to see you there. Policy Director Ashish George, myself, Executive Director Gary Kreitz, and a handful of wonderful state legislators. And if you've enjoyed tonight, we've got another wonderful Pride program on June 24th, also a Thursdays with NAMI, starting at 6. Awesome new documentary called Cured. It hasn't been out yet. It will be aired on PBS in October. It is about the behind the scenes fight that took place to have homosexuality removed from the DSM. That stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is a big, long, huge reference book, a list of mental health diagnoses. Obviously, the LGBTQ and the mainstream medical community today understand that's LGBTQ status is not a mental illness, but it was a big deal getting that removed. How did that happen? What were some of the personalities involved? Come and check it out at our special event, June 24th on Cured. That I'm sure that will appear in the chat box shortly. I will be putting it there myself. Please fill out the survey when your Zoom session ends here. That will be, that helps us to improve over time, and it helps us show our funders the value of what we do. Panelists, would you like to say anything before we close? We go as long as we have new questions in the chat box.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. Go right ahead.
There's always the fun game of you go, no, you go. In my work, I continue to be fulfilled and uplifted by the supportive community. And so for the folks tuning in and even being willing to hear us out, I hope that you're inspired and encouraged to find ways to hold more space. I continue to find that privilege is such a dirty word for folks. And I would just like to close and offer that privilege to me is opportunity. With the privilege that I have through the access to education that I was given, I have a privilege to be able to hold space and to take my learnings to move education forward in that way and advocate for folks in a way that they may not have tools to do, and to teach young folks about action and direct action and the way that systems work. So I feel so grateful to be able to hold the door open, right, and in our Southern hospitality way. And I'm grateful for all of the young folks who might be tuning in or that you all might support. That, my goodness, there's so much hope in this up and coming generation and the work that they're doing. I learn from Gen Z every single day, and I'm grateful for that. Thanks again for the invitation to be here.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll go ahead. I just want to thank y'all for inviting me and thank everyone for attending. I want to thank everyone for their openness and willing to listen and willingness to share. It's things like these that's really going to progress us forward, this community and connection. I know for myself, I have found just as much healing and growth through the work that I've done that these kids and families have. Yeah, you know, through connection and communication, we can get through it.
Yeah, I echo all of that. You know, I know that I've been on another one of Peg's Thursdays with NAMI, and I always appreciate the opportunity to come and speak and just talk about, you know, talk about my personal experience and share my knowledge. And I definitely can say that these two other panelists I'm with are very impressive and have so much more going on than I think I do. But it's pretty amazing because I also appreciate, you know, getting to learn from other people. Yeah, thank you everybody again for coming and for asking some of those vulnerable questions and just kind of sharing what's going on in your lives. And thanks everybody that's watching on Facebook too.
All right. Well, I will join the thank you parade and thank our panelists for being here and for offering a blend of authenticity and speaking from the heart and sharing a lot of great knowledge. I think that's just a very powerful mix. So I want to thank you for all that you bring to the table and for, again, sharing your time and your wisdom with us tonight. And I think that is the end of our show. So I want to thank again everyone for being here. Happy Pride Month and have a wonderful June. All right. Good night, all.
Thank you all so much.